Said this before the class, but I want to say it again. I am so very grateful for the opportunity to be here to speak with you today. This church has a special place in my heart, being the first group that really helped me confirm that I really did want to preach the gospel. But you guys have supported me whenever I needed it, both financially back in the day when I was at places that were unable to do that, as well as emotionally and morally, so just very grateful for this. I was thankful that you guys are studying Genesis because a quarter ago they studied in the dog class, but I didn't get to be in there. So I love the book of Genesis. It is foundational for everything, and I'm just so very happy to talk to you today. Got a question. Have you ever gotten in your daily Bible reading to a part where you just kind of wanted to skip over it? Now, for some of you, that might be like Lamentations or Song of Solomon or maybe all the prophets, which is a shame because the prophets are great. But maybe you get some places and you're just like, I guess I'll read it because it's my chapter that's assigned for today, and I'll move on to the good stuff. I got to say, I was grateful when I saw that on the day that you guys cover Joseph, this is the first time I've ever seen the Joseph story 37 to 50. Usually it's 37 and then 39 to 50. Because chapter 38 is the one that we don't like to read it. Now, maybe it's not just, hey, that doesn't really seem to fit, but also the content of chapter 38, which makes us not really want to spend a whole lot of time dwelling on it. Disclaimer, the Old Testament accurately records things and depicts them. Sometimes they are less than pleasant. They are graphic. I promise for the parents here not to be any more graphic than the Bible is, but I'm going to read what chapter 38 has to say, and there are some very unpleasant things in that chapter. The Bible is not something that shies away from reporting the full gruesome details. As much as we hate to read it and we'd love to skip it over, we wouldn't even need Jesus if the gory details weren't there, right? You ever think about that? So I'm just going to kind of back up a little bit to the last point of my Bible class that I didn't get to make. As a foundation, as our starting point. What is God's intention for marriage and family? At the end of Genesis 2, we read that God really showed man that, yeah, your work, it's great. The animal kingdom, plant kingdom, it's great. You've got a job, it's wonderful. I even walk with you in the garden, but you need a companion. And while a dog may be a man's best friend, there's something lacking that a man doesn't have when he has a spiritual, godly mate. Now, obviously, there can be marriages that are less than perfect, but in Eden, at the beginning, man and woman were designed for each other, and she was designed from him. In every way, they were meant to fit together. And Moses draws a conclusion, therefore, for this reason, you got to withdraw from father and mother, you join together, you leave and cleave. Later on, when there's difficulties in the New Testament about marriage and family, Jesus does not go to Moses' law to establish what's right and wrong. He goes back to the beginning. God's plan has always been one man, one woman, and really, death wasn't even in the picture yet. I say for life, but at the point, eternal life was there, right? Death entered the world later. So it was one man, one woman forever was the plan. But we understand that sin struck, and there was some difficulty in the curse. The woman, if you read about her curse, part of that is this struggle, this conflict between husband and wife. And it doesn't take much longer that one of Cain's relatives, Lamech, marries two wives. I mean, we're barely 4 or 5 chapters in, and we've already got polygamy happening. And then you've got things like Sodom and Gomorrah, where marriage and family is just ripped apart. You've got stories with Lot and his daughters, and there's horrifying stuff. And that's just kind of the marriage and the physical relationship side. The brothers and sisters that fight each other. That happens right away too, right? You get Cain hating Abel. You get Ishmael hating Isaac. You get Jacob and Esau. You get the brothers that go after Joseph. This is ugly stuff. The Bible does not present a perfect world. In fact, it's a broken world, which we probably can relate to. And the sins and problems that afflicted their marriages and families are the same kinds of things that can afflict ours. I'm going to give Judah a bad rap in the beginning today, but where did he learn? Where did he learn that? Well, you see, in Abraham's family, there was a rivalry between Isaac and Ishmael. And Isaac and Rebekah literally pitted their favorite children against each other. And so, is it any difference or any surprise that there's no difference in Jacob's family when he picks a favorite kid out of his favorite wife? You know, as a kid, I remember learning the tribes of Jacob, the tribes of Israel. But the thing that we need a real song for is to figure out who belongs to who. You see, first of all, Jacob, he wants to get married to Rachel. But it's against their tradition, and I would argue, from my understanding of it, not really God's plan either. Leah was the favored wife that God wanted Jacob to marry. But no, he wanted what he wanted. And so even after he had married her, he did whatever it took to marry Rachel. How do I know Leah was blessed? She was given 4 children right off the bat. The text tells us because God wanted that to happen. Altogether, she ends up being given 7 children from her body, a perfect, ideal 7 children, because Dinah, the daughter, ends up being there. There's 6 sons and a daughter. Actually, did you know Rachel, the favorite wife, wasn't even buried in the family burial plot? And she's so bitter and angry because God won't give her what her wants. She's just a real bitter lady in this. You see, the families are disgusting, really, frankly. And that's the product of what Judah is coming out of. And so when we get to Genesis 37, we come to a story which I'm not going to spoil all the details, but I'm going to hit the highlights. We're going to cover it more in our classes about Joseph. But Joseph is, the evidence of him being the favorite from the favorite wife is that he's given a garment. Now, I don't want to step on too many toes, and I know your kids' classes are probably going to color the rainbow coat, and maybe even have rainbow coats. I don't know what you're going to do with it all, but the truth is, when that word was originally translated, they didn't really know what it meant. And so where we put varicolored tunic or multicolored coat, now we understand that it literally means a coat to the palms. So that would mean like a long-sleeve garment that would come to the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. And what that actually is a royal coat. Something that if you wore that, you don't work in that. Later on, the same garment is given to David's daughter Tamar, coincidentally, interestingly, because she's a royal princess and she doesn't have to work. She doesn't have to get her hands dirty. So we probably can't fully grasp what it was like to be those other brothers. But I don't know if any of you ever had your parents, your grandparents did big gardens or anything like that. You had to go out and pick green beans or maybe just mowing the yard. But imagine all the kids have to do the yard chores on a hot day, except one kid gets to sit inside in nice cool air. That's what's going on here. So they're out tending the sheep, they're out planting the crops, they're out working in the field. And then to add insult to injury, he comes out in his fancy coat that can't even get dirty because it's not designed for work, and he tattles on his brothers. They're not watching the sheep like they should be. And so they hate him. And yes, hating your brother is unnatural. It's not how it's supposed to be. But we don't get a picture of an ideal world here, do we? And so here he comes. Let's throw him in a pit. Now, the truth is that Reuben, the oldest, at least had the intentions of going back later to rescue him. But he had to leave. And he says, guys, we'll just leave him down in this pit. But I want you to notice our introduction to Judah as a character. Maybe it would help if I move my PowerPoint along, huh? The Redemption of Judah is the title of the lesson. But look in chapter 37, verse 26. This is after Reuben is gone. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he's our brother and our flesh. But his brothers listened. So he's the sneaky brother who came up with the plan, even though he may not be the official leader. Maybe your family had one of those kids. You understand. I don't know how much better it is. I guess at least he's not killing him. But sell your brother for money. That's also, there's some times I wanted to sell a few of my siblings. They probably wanted to sell me more often. But at the end of the day, we were still family. This is hate. This is animosity created by a dysfunctional family, a step family that is not united, that is ugly. Children by 4 women, and they all are somehow supposed to get along, even when dad picks the favorite. And Judah says, guys, let's sell him. They sell him for the price of a slave. They sell him to Ishmaelite traders, and we know Joseph's story. Joseph's story is one of misfortune after misfortune. He's the ever-trusting in God optimist, right? Okay, my brothers hate me. I'm in slavery now. I'll be the best slave I could possibly be. God shows him favor. He's the best slave he could ever be. Well, my boss's wife lies about me. Now I'm in jail. Well, I'm in jail. I'll be the best model prisoner that I ever could be. And he watches over the prisoners. And then prisoners forget about him, even though he helps them. For years, he's forgotten about in prison. But finally, God gives him what he really deserves, right? This position of authority, the Grand Vizier of Egypt at the time. He has only one person ahead of him in the authority, at least regarding the matters of feeding all the nations and giving the royal treasury, taking care of the royal treasury. And later on in his life, instead of being bitter, Joseph says, don't you know, God put me here so I could save the world. But this isn't about Joseph's story. We're going to talk about Judah's story, because I would actually argue that while Joseph's story is important because it's about the preservation of God's people, Judah's story is actually even more important in bringing about the Messiah. And you might say, wait a minute. He gets one chapter that's ugly and a couple of mentions. What are you saying, that Judah is a main character? He's a side character. Judah is not. The redemption of Judah is what I believe Genesis 37 through 50 is all about. Because I'll ask the question to you that I asked all the adults in the adult class, what is Genesis all about? I believe firmly, first and foremost, it is about God being a promise-keeping God. And God makes promises to Eve. God makes promises to Noah. God makes promises to Abraham, continues those to Isaac and Jacob. And the whole story is about how is God going to do that? It's not going to be in expected ways. It's going to be from Seth instead of Cain or Abel. It's going to be from wiping out the world with a global flood, but saving Noah and his family. It's going to be with a 100-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman, the story of a tabloid, having a kid. And that kid almost gets offered an offering, but it lives. It's going to be through the younger son, Jacob, usurping the role of Esau. And it's going to be through Judah, who, by the way, is the fourth-born. The fourth-born child is going to be the one who eventually brings about the Messiah. And many steps before that, King David. You see, this is about King David's story and ultimately about Christ's story. But here's where I'm going to read chapter 38. It's a long reading. Pay attention. I'll let the Bible speak for itself and just offer a little commentary. Like I said, prepare yourself. It's rough. This is not approved of stuff, but this is faithfully recorded stuff. Genesis chapter 38. It came to pass at that time, Judah departed from his brothers, visited a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite woman who was Shua. He married her, went into her. She conceived and bore a son. He called his name She conceived again and bore a son. She called his name Onan. She conceived yet again and bore a son, called his name Shelah. He was at Chezib when she bore him. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord killed him. Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife, marry her, raise up an heir to your brother." But Onan knew that the heir would not be his. It came to pass, when he went to his brother's wife, he admitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. The thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown." For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. Tamar went and dwelled in her father's house. Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. Judah was comforted, went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not yet given to him for a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, "Please let me come in to you," for he did not know she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, "What will you give me that you may come in to me?" He said, "I'll send a young goat from the flock." She said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your signet, your cord, your staff that's in your hand." Then he gave them to her, went into her, and conceived by him. So she arose, went away, laid aside her veil, put on garments of her widowhood. Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where's the harlot who was openly by the roadside?" And they said, "There was no harlot in this place." So he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." Also the men of the place said there was no harlot in this place. Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her." And it came to pass about 3 months after, Judah was told, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry." So Judah said, "Bring her out, let her be burned." When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child." And she said, "Please determine whose these are, the signet, the cord, the staff." So Judah acknowledged them and said, "She's been much more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah, my son." He never knew her again. Now it came to pass at that time of giving birth, that, behold, the twins were in her womb. So it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread, bound on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, his brother came out unexpectedly, and she said, "How did you break through? This breach be upon you." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out also, who had the scarlet thread on his hand. His name was Zerah. There's the story that you're like, why is that there? I don't like reading it. It interrupts my wonderful Joseph story that I know and love. Why is it there? I would offer to you that this is the moral turning point for Judah. That he realizes, I'm out of line. I've messed up. I have lived my life without concern or care for God's plan, and in doing so, there are painful results that have happened because of this. Up until this point, Judah seems to live for himself, but after he makes things right after this sin, I believe Judah starts to live a different type of a life. Just to fill you in case you aren't familiar with the Old Testament, there's something called the law of levirate marriage. As much as this hurts our modern sensibilities, there wasn't really a lot for a woman to do to provide for herself except for marriage and family. A lot of it was through your husband, that you had an inheritance, you had resources to care for you. I used to kind of wonder what the whole dowry idea was. Having visited some countries where dowries are still practiced, it's usually financial now, but it used to be that, hey, these animals are going to be there, and as they produce livestock, in case something happens to you, there's a way to care for you if the husband's gone. Or if you mess around, there's some money there to take care of you if the husband's gone. So it's not buying and selling women or something like that. The dowry was a way to care for women in that day. But if the oldest son, who was married to this person, died childless, then the next unmarried male relative had the obligation to marry her. And the very first son that you would have would not be given your name and your family, but would rather be considered an heir of your late brother who had passed. And this way, no name would be blotted out from the children of Israel. You see, your family name and your family land and your family inheritance was how you showed your ownership in the promised land and in God's promises and being part of his people. But just like the story of Ruth, which also deals with this idea, who really wants to have a kid that's not considered yours, and all this stuff goes to them, but not your family? It wasn't a pleasant arrangement for some. And so God ends up, he first of all kills the first wicked son, and then this second son who refuses to obey God, he gets killed too. And Jacob makes a false promise to Tamar. He's unwilling to keep it, though, for fear of losing his third son, his only son left. And she waits patiently, and she doesn't get the security that she was promised in marrying into the family of God. I don't blame her for what she did. Yeah, it's not right, but she's a Canaanite, living in a Canaanite land with Canaanite morals, and God's people are acting just like Canaanites, so how is she supposed to know better? And this story is made clear that in these times of ignorance, Judah was the one that should have known better. And he failed to step up and be the leader, the family leader that he should have been. And so, after his wife passes, he wants some comfort, and he goes out, and instead of finding another wife or getting married, there's a prostitute. Very wicked, but that's what happened. What's worse is that he believed her to be doing that in service of one of the local pagan gods. So he's looking to take care of some loneliness, and he's actually worshiping the pagan gods the way that they worship them instead of the God of heaven. Like I said, Judah is a flawed, deeply flawed character here. And when it's revealed to him what he did, he doesn't blame Tamar. He knows immediately, I've done wrong. And so he cares for her and her family for the rest of their life. And like I said, I think this is the growing up moment that Judah needs. But Judah is really kind of the de facto leader of the family, because Jacob's other kids start to fail right and left. We'll talk more about that towards the end of the lesson. But he wrongs his daughter-in-law, Tamar, deeply. And really, think about it, kind of messes up the rest of her life. She doesn't really get the happy marriage. Sure, she gets 2 kids, but it isn't the family situation that she would have longed for. It's not ideal. It's not what she was promised, not what she hoped for. But after a while, Joseph has now been elevated to an important position in Egypt. But we find out the famine doesn't just affect Egypt. It affects Palestine and a lot of the ancient Near East. Much of the ancient world that had trade with Israel, they're hungry. And they know with this large family, it's grown to be almost 70 people this time, plus flocks and herds and servants and all of that stuff. How are we going to make it? And so they come up with the plan to go to Egypt, to pay some money. We're going to get some grain so we can survive and make it through these lean years. And Joseph recognizes them right away, but they haven't seen him since he's 17 years old. I couldn't even grow a beard at 17. It was patchy. I think I had a goatee when I was here, when I was 18 or 19. But I'm sure with the Egyptian look and all the Egyptian makeup and the Egyptian jewelry and the clothing and the garb, and speaking in good Egyptian without an accent at this point, he was unknown. And so he pretended like he didn't know Hebrew, and he pretended like he was a stranger, and he kind of comes up with this ruse and learns more about his family. I'm not sure I agree with everything Joseph's doing at this point, but he's trying to find out, can these people be trusted? Can my brothers be trusted? He knows them right away, because many of them were adults by the time he was sold. But what happens is that Simeon gets taken. Jacob, whose heart is already hurting because he feels like he's lost Joseph, now he feels like, I'm going to lose Simeon too. And Reuben steps up as the firstborn in the end of Genesis 42. He says in verse 37 of Genesis 42, Reuben spoke to his father, saying, "Kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you, but put him in my hands, and I'll bring him back to you." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave." Reuben tries to step up, but that's not much of a sacrifice, is it? Hey, you lost two sons, you can kill my two sons. If it doesn't work out, you kill my boys. I want to notice the difference between him and Judah. Look what Judah is willing to do that Reuben was unwilling to do. Look down in chapter 43. Now the famine was severe in the land. It came to pass, when they'd eaten up the grain which had brought up from Egypt, their father said to them, Go back, buy us a little food. But Judah spoke to him, saying, The man, that being Joseph in disguise, solemnly warned us, saying, You should not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, You should not see my face unless your brother is with you. And Israel said, Why do you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you had another brother? They said, The man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our family, saying, Is your father still alive? Have you another brother? And we told him according to these words. Could we possibly have known he would say, Bring your brother down? Judah said to Israel his father, Send the lad with me. We will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. Here's the difference between him and Reuben. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back, you set him before me. Let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned this second time. He says, lay my life on the line. I will give the life, my own life, for the life of my brother. Reuben was unwilling to make that sacrifice. I remember that story, the whole farmer's breakfast thing. I think I actually heard it first from Mark, but I know it's not just originally with him. The idea that the animals on the farm wanted to do something for the farmer to make him a breakfast, and the chicken suggested perhaps a ham and egg breakfast, and the pig says something like, well, for you, that's a sacrifice, or that's a commitment, but for me, it's a total sacrifice, right? The chicken gives eggs but still lives, but the pig is going to be dead for bacon or ham. Judah's willing to give it all, his own life, so that his brothers may live. Sound familiar, right? Instead of being the brother that betrays a brother for the price of silver, which it's funny that Judas kind of has that name, right? There's this link between Judas and Jesus with that whole thing. He's now becoming a Christ figure. He's switching from the betrayer to being the one who is the willing sacrifice. Sounds a little more heroic, doesn't it? But it gets better. In chapter 44, he actually goes and there's this second test that Joseph does. He's really messing with them at this time. I know what it's like to mess with brothers, but not on this level, man. He is really messing with the brothers. He puts his special silver cup in the bag, so they're on their way, and they find it, and also their money's in there. What is going to happen? We're all going to die. He's going to think we did this on purpose, but there's some misunderstanding. We got to go back there and figure this all out. Look in chapter 44, starting in verse 14, when Judah speaks up. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house. Isn't it weird? It's not Reuben, right? Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there. They fell before him on the ground. Joseph said to them, What deed is this you've done? Did you not know that as such a man I can certainly practice divination? Then Judah said, What shall we say, my Lord? How shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he also whom the cup was found. But he said, Far be it from me that I should do so to the man whose hand the cup was found. He should be my slave. As for you, go up in peace to your father. Judah says, God is giving us what we deserve for what we did to our brother Joseph, not knowing that he's speaking to Joseph. And Joseph says, well, you can leave Benjamin with me. No, you can't do that. Judah came near to him and said, oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing. Do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age who is young. His brother is dead. He alone is left of his mother's children. His father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me that I may set eyes on him. We said to my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should not leave his father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. So it was, when we went up to your servant my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go back and buy us a little food. We said, we cannot go down if our youngest brother is with us. When we will go down, for we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know, my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out for me, and I said, surely he's torn to pieces. I've not seen him since. But if you take this one also for me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Now therefore, when I come up to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame for my father forever. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as slave to the Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go to my father if the lad's not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? I know it's a lot of reading, but what is he saying? He says, I will take whatever punishment's due to him because I love my father, I love my brothers, and what I did in the past was wrong, and I'm never going to do that again. Instead of a story about brothers hating brothers, with Ishmael abusing Isaac, with Cain killing Abel, with Jacob hurting Esau and Esau wanting to hurt him back, instead of that kind of a story, we've got a brother finally stepping up in this book and saying, I give my life for a brother. And this is the first moment in the book of Genesis that happens. Every other brother fails. Every other family member fails in this book to be there, to be that brother's keeper. This is the answer to Cain's question that he's like, I don't know if I'm a brother's keeper. Yes, you are, Judah, and he knows it. Other people matter more than him. That's powerful. And I want you to notice who's leading. It's not Reuben. It's not Simeon. It's not Levi. When Jacob sends back his family, who leads them? In Genesis chapter 46 and verse 28, the one who leads, he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen. Judah came first. And at the end of his life, Jacob, now known as Israel, he's a bitter old man, but he gives a blessing about the future. Actually, in Hebrews 11, that's the only redeeming thing given about Isaac and Jacob, is their blessings for the future. They didn't have very redeeming lives, but they trusted that God had a plan for promises to be fulfilled later on. And at the end of Genesis here, in Genesis 49, verses 8 through 12, I want you to notice the blessing upon Judah. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you've gone up. He bows down. He lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine, his donkey colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, his clothes in the blood of the grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. It's not Reuben. The very first couple of verses of this chapter says Reuben messed up big time. He committed an evil sexual sin, and God says, Reuben, you are disqualified for being my leader. How about Simeon and Levi, the next two? No, because when their sister was assaulted, and then a whole city decided they wanted to convert, They made him take the rite of circumcision, and while they were in pain, they wiped out the whole town. Cruel and unnecessary violence. Simeon and Levi don't get the rule. What about Joseph? He's the one that saw these dreams of stacks of wheat bowing down to his, and of sun, moon, and stars bowing down to him. You'd think it'd be Joseph, right? But no. Joseph isn't going to be the one to lead God's people. Although there's a certain sense in which Ephraim and Manasseh are the tribes to rule the northern kingdoms. But ultimately, God's people bow down to Judah. And this prophecy, it narrows it down who Christ is going to be. Even mentioning the kingly donkey that you can ride in on. But this shouldn't surprise you if you know the story. God picks Seth instead of Cain or Abel. You know, God doesn't pick Ham and Japheth. He picks Shem. God picks Abraham. And then Isaac rather than Ishmael. And Jacob rather than Esau. God doesn't pick who we expect him to pick. And you might say, well, he's not worthy. This ugly, terrible life, this past, don't you see it, God? Pick Joseph. Pick Benjamin. But you see, this illustrates the human condition. And I'm going to say what I said in my class briefly, and I'm going to repeat it again because this is important. God's promises and God's faithfulness is not based upon our worthiness. God's promises and His faithfulness are not based upon our worthiness. And if you forget everything else about the sermon, remember that. He makes promises because He is faithful, not because we are faithful. And even if we mess up, He still uses our mistakes to enact His plan. He's that good. His word is so certain that even if I fight Him and fight Him and fight Him, He'll use me anyway. And you know that's right. Saul became Paul. And he was kicking against the goads of God's plan with everything in his being. And God made him an apostle who gave his life for Christians. God knows where you've been, but that's not where you have to end up. He knows what you've done, but that doesn't have to define you forever. And one need look no further than the direct bloodline of Jesus Christ Himself than to see it. Because the very first undesirables in that, and that's words that I think are accurate, are Judah and Tamar. But He doesn't just stop there. He includes Ruth and Rahab, Gentiles. Rahab's a harlot. He uses someone who, it technically says, is the wife of Uriah. It doesn't even say David's wife, Bathsheba. And He's not using firstborn sons like you'd expect if humankind invented this, right? Even David was youngest of 8 boys. Solomon, there's 3 brothers older than him. God doesn't operate according to what we think He should do it, but yet we get mad when God doesn't do things the way we think it should work. So I just want to add a couple of lessons. He can use the least likely of people in His plans, and you know, the least likely of people is me. And the least likely of people is you. And so don't start to think I'm so important. I didn't have that much to change anyway. I'm pretty good. Just need a little bit of grace here and there. No. There's nothing inherent about you that makes you worthy of using in God's plan. I'll never forget a couple of years ago when this group of nuns sold a baseball card. And it sounds weird, right? But they were trying to raise money for their charity or whatever, and it turned out to be, I believe, a Honus Wagner card. And the reason why it's such a rare card was because it was advertised in some cigarettes, and he was firmly against tobacco use. I think I'm getting the story right. And so there's very few of these cards made. And I ask you, what's the value of a Honus Wagner baseball card? Not much, technically, right? It's an old, frayed piece of cardboard and ink. But what's the value of a Honus Wagner baseball card? It's worth what someone is willing to pay for it. And it went for millions and helped those little old nuns with whatever charity they were working on. There's nothing inherent about you that's valuable, but there's something about you that's valuable. You were created in God's image, and He bestowed you with honor above all the creation. That's why creation matters. You know, people suffer with depression and all that. I'm not very important. I don't matter. I'm worthless. I've got no purpose, no value. It isn't, the solution isn't to say, look what all the things you're good at. Look who loves you. No, the solution is God made you in His image. That's why you have value. And repentance is possible no matter your past. Judah became a faithful servant in God's plan, and God used him. You know, King David's singing Amazing Grace in heaven with King Manasseh, the best and worst king. I'm sad for what you've done in the past, but honestly, whatever you've done, it can still be washed away. And you can be valuable in His kingdom. And I think this point, hopefully I've made it clear, and it's been made clear all week long, but I am my brother's keeper. The answer to that question, what, am I my brother's keeper? Yeah, you are, Cain. Yeah, you are, Ishmael. Yeah, you are, Jacob and Esau. Yeah, you are, Judah and brothers. You are your brother's keeper. You got to understand the idea that Judah finally realized, that Joseph understood, I'm here to take care of you. And it's only a self-centered life that refuses to see that point. 1 John 3:16 tells us about Christ's love for us, which inspires our love for others. We know John 3:16 says God so loved the world that He gave us His Son. But 1 John 3:16, He gave His life for us. So we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. And you might say, yeah, I'd take a bullet for someone. I'd give them a heart or kidney if I die, something like that. That's not what it means. He says if you see your brother in need and you have the means to meet it, and you take care of their daily needs, your life is not your own, it's for somebody else. You are your brother's keeper. You don't have an option. And the final point is that God used Judah to bring about our salvation. Everything about this story points to Christ. From the betrayed son becomes king, despite his humiliation, all the way to someone willing to give their life for another. There's so many elements of this story, and I'm sure you're going to talk about them in the Joseph class more than, we're not going to be doing Judah. But really, all of Genesis is about God keeping His promises to bring about a Messiah. So here's my final thought. Have you submitted your life to the King that God promised in the book of Genesis? He reigns today at the right hand of God. He knows you've messed up your life. He knows you've made mistakes. But He wants you anyway. And He wants to take you, who don't feel very useful or important, and make you something useful and important in the kingdom. These qualities are ours, and they are increasing. We are neither useless nor unfruitful in the kingdom of God. That's what Peter says for us. You can be a valuable part of the kingdom of God today if you will submit to the will of the King, Jesus Christ.